Alright, time's up. Management says you're loitering, stand up and leave.
I'm not loitering, I'm conducting business. Verify my name before you embarrass yourself.
I don't need your story. Show ID now or you're going in cuffs for trespass.
And read the lease on my screen, because if you arrest me in my own building, you're done before lunch.
Officer Derek Vance had worn the badge of the Metro City Police Department for exactly 9 months when he walked into a decision that would incinerate his career and cost the taxpayers $6.4 million. He was 23 years old, fresh out of the academy, fueled by adrenaline and a dangerous misunderstanding of what authority actually meant. He carried himself with the swagger of a man who believed the uniform granted him immunity from consequence, a rookie convinced that his instinct was sharper than the law itself. One rainy Tuesday morning inside the cavernous, echoing halls of the historic Union Station, Vance received a dispatch call regarding a disturbance at a coffee shop. The subject of the call was Marcus Thorne, a 62-year-old man sitting quietly in a corner booth reviewing architectural schematics on a tablet while nursing a double espresso. What Vance did next, ignoring the man's calm demeanor, dismissing his verbal warnings, and dragging him out in handcuffs before a crowd of rush-hour commuters would become a definitive case study in how implicit bias rots the foundation of community policing. Before we unravel this disaster, where are you tuning in from? If you believe that justice should be blind but not deaf to the truth, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. We need your help to keep telling the stories that the system tries to bury. Union Station is the beating heart of the city's transit system. Built in the 1920s, it is a cathedral of transportation, featuring soaring, vaulted ceilings, marble floors worn smooth by generations of travelers and the constant rhythmic hum of trains arriving and departing. Tucked away in the main concourse near the north entrance sits the Iron Rail Café. It is an upscale establishment known for its artisanal roasts and vintage railway decor, a place frequented by lawyers, city planners, and the heavy hitters of the downtown business district. It was 8:45 a.m. on a Tuesday in November. A cold autumn rain lashed against the high arched windows, driving more people than usual inside for warmth. The air inside the cafe smelled of roasted beans and damp wool. Every table was taken. The line snaked out the door, and the noise level was a dull roar of conversation and steaming milk. Marcus Thorne had arrived at 8 a.m. sharp. At 62, Thorne was a man who moved with the deliberate heavy grace of someone who had spent a lifetime building things with his bare hands before he started building them with his bank account. He was dressed in a faded tan Carhartt barn coat, dark work denim that had seen actual work, and scuffed leather boots. He didn't look like the lawyers in their three-piece suits or the tech consultants in their cashmere sweaters. He looked like a laborer, perhaps a janitor or a construction foreman taking a break. What the casual observer couldn't see was the history etched into the lines of his face. Thorne was a retired master carpenter who had pivoted to real estate development in his 40s. Through 3 decades of shrewd investments and tireless labor, he had become one of the largest commercial landlords in the state. He didn't just buy buildings, he restored them. And this morning he wasn't just a customer at the Iron Rail Café. He was the landlord. In fact, he held the master lease for the entire retail concourse of Union Station. He was sitting in the corner booth, a spot he had personally designed during the renovation, checking the structural schematics for a proposed expansion of the kitchen. He had a meeting with the station's Historical Preservation Board at 9:30 a.m., and he was simply preparing. He had spoken to no one, bothered no one, and paid for his espresso with a black Centurion card that the barista hadn't even looked at twice. But to the eyes of a new ambitious manager, Marcus Thorne was a stain on the aesthetic. Brock Halloway was 25 years old and had been the shift supervisor at the Iron Rail for 3 weeks. He was the kind of young man who wore his authority like a costume ill-fitting and performative. He had been hired from a trendy bistro in the suburbs and was desperate to prove to the corporate ownership that he could elevate the brand. Brock was obsessed with image. He wanted the cafe to look like a brochure for urban luxury. He constantly adjusted the lighting, nagged the baristas about their apron knots, and monitored the seating area like a hawk. When he looked out across the sea of laptops and suits, his eyes snagged on Marcus Thorne. In Brock's mind, Thorne didn't fit. The faded coat, the rough hands, the solitary stillness in a room full of frantic energy, it all signaled vagrant to Brock's prejudiced assessment. He watched Thorne for 10 minutes, his irritation mounting. He assumed the man had bought a single cheap coffee and was now camping out, taking up a prime four-top booth that could be used by actual professionals. It never occurred to Brock that the man in the work boots might be worth more than the entire coffee chain. It never occurred to him to simply go over and ask if everything was all right. Instead, Brock saw a problem that needed to be excised to preserve the vibe of his shop. Brock approached the counter, whispering to a barista, "How long has that guy in the dirty coat been there?" The barista. A young college student named Sarah looked over. "You mean Mr. Thorne? He comes in every Tuesday. He's fine, Brock. He tips really well." Brock scoffed, dismissing her institutional knowledge. "He looks like he just walked off a construction site. He's been nursing that cup for 40 minutes. We have paying customers standing up. I'm handling it." Brock didn't handle it by talking to Thorne. He didn't handle it by offering a refill. He handled it by retreating to the back office and dialing the non-emergency police line, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "This is the manager at the iron rail in Union Station. I have an individual who is refusing to leave and loitering. He's making the customers uneasy. He looks like a transient, and he's becoming aggressive when asked to move." That was a lie. Brock had never asked him to move, but Brock knew that the word aggressive was the magic key that unlocked a faster police response. He hung up the phone, adjusted his tie, and waited for the enforcement arm of the state to do his dirty work. The call was routed to patrol. Officer Derek Vance was parked 2 blocks away, idling in his cruiser, watching the rain streak down the windshield. Vance was 23, a former high school linebacker who missed the physical collisions of the gridiron. He had joined the force because he wanted to be the sheepdog protecting the flock, a metaphor he used frequently on his social media. However, his supervisors had already noted a troubling pattern in his 9 months on the street. Vance had a problem with what he called disrespect. If a citizen didn't immediately bow to his authority, Vance escalated. He viewed questions as resistance and silence as guilt. He had already been counseling twice for unprofessional conduct. During traffic stops, talking down to drivers, shouting unnecessary commands, but he had brushed these off as the department being too politically correct. When the dispatch came through, subject refusing to leave possible loitering aggressive male at Union Station, Vance sat up straight. This was what he was looking for, a tangible problem, a bad guy to toss out. He keyed his mic. "Unit 4 Alpha, I'm close. Show me en route." He put the car in gear, his heart rate climbing, ready to restore order to a situation he hadn't even seen yet. Vance parked his cruiser in the loading zone outside the main entrance, leaving the lights flashing a visual declaration of his presence. He walked into the station, his hand resting habitually near his holster, his eyes scanning the crowd with a practiced, predatory gaze. He wasn't looking for the truth. He was looking for the threat. He marched into the iron rail café, the heavy thud of his boots on the tile announcing his arrival. The conversation in the shop dipped in volume as customers noticed the uniformed officer. Brock Holloway rushed out from behind the counter, waving a hand. "Officer, over here." Vance approached the manager. "You the one who called?" Brock nodded, playing the part of the beleaguered victim. "Yes, that guy in the corner booth. The one in the work jacket. He's been here for an hour, bought 1 drink, and he's just loitering. I need the table for paying customers. He's bringing down the atmosphere, if you know what I mean." Vance looked at the booth. He saw a black man in work clothes sitting alone. In Vance's mind, the narrative was already written. This was a vagrant trying to stay warm, probably confused, probably going to be difficult. Vance didn't ask if the man had threatened anyone. He didn't ask if he had been asked to leave. He just nodded to Brock. "I got it." Vance walked straight to the corner booth. Marcus Thorne was deep in thought, zooming in on a digital blueprint on his tablet. He had just noticed a discrepancy in the load-bearing wall specs for the renovation. He didn't look up until a shadow fell across his table. Thorne raised his eyes, expecting perhaps a busboy clearing the empty cup. Instead, he found Officer Vance towering over him, thumbs hooked in his vest face set in a hard scowl. "Time to go, partner," Vance said, his voice loud enough to carry to the nearby tables. Thorne paused, his brow furrowing slightly. He didn't panic. He didn't flinch. He simply took a slow sip of his water. "Excuse me," Thorne asked, his voice a deep, gravelly rumble. "You heard me," Vance snapped. "Management wants you gone. You're loitering. You need to pack up your stuff and exit the premises immediately." Thorne set his glass down. He turned his body fully toward the officer, his movements calm and deliberate. "Officer, I believe you have been misinformed. I am a paying customer. I am finishing my coffee and I am working." "You've been here an hour," Vance countered, leaning in, invading Thorne's personal space. "This is private property. The manager has the right to refuse service to anyone. He says you're trespassing. That means you leave or I make you leave." "Meh." Thorne looked past the officer to the counter where Brock was watching with a smug expression, arms crossed. Thorne realized exactly what was happening. He had seen this look before in loan offices in the 80s and boardrooms in the 90s, the assumption that he didn't belong. "Young man," Thorne said, his voice dropping an octave, becoming dangerously quiet. "I suggest you take a breath and listen to me. I'm not trespassing. I am conducting business. If the manager has an issue, he can speak to me directly. But I am not leaving." Vance's face flushed. The "young man" comment hit his ego like a slap. He wasn't a young man. He was the law. "I'm not asking you, I'm telling you." Vance barked, his hand moving to his radio. "Stand up. Now. Get your ID out." Thorne remained seated. He tapped the screen of his tablet. "Officer, before you take this any further, you need to understand who I am. I don't just have a right to be here as a customer. I hold the lease on this building." Vance let out a short, incredulous laugh. "Yeah, sure. And I'm the mayor. Let's go. Stand up." Thorne didn't move. "I can show you the documentation on this tablet right now. The deed, the business license, and the lease agreement with the transit authority. Look at the screen." Thorne extended the tablet toward the officer. Vance didn't even look at it. He swatted the air as if waving away a fly. "I don't need to look at your iPad. I need you to comply with a lawful order. It is not a lawful order if it is based on a false premise," Thorne said, his patience thinning but his composure absolute. "I own the master lease. I am effectively the landlord of this coffee shop. If you arrest me for trespassing in a building I control, you are going to end your career before lunch." The cafe had gone silent. Every eye was on them. People were holding up phones. The red recording lights were blinking. Vance saw the cameras, but instead of checking himself, he doubled down. He couldn't back down now. Not in front of an audience. Not to a guy in work boots who claimed to be a landlord. "Last warning," Vance said, unclipping his handcuffs. "Stand up or you're under arrest for trespassing and resisting." Thorne looked the officer in the eye. "I am not resisting. I am informing you of a fact. Verify my identity. Call your sergeant." "I don't need a sergeant to take out the trash," Vance sneered. He reached out, grabbed Thorne's arm, and yanked. Thorne was a big man, and he didn't budge easily, but he didn't fight back. He allowed the force of the pull to bring him to his feet. He knew the drill. If he pulled back, he would be charged with assault on an officer. If he raised his voice, he would be disorderly. His only weapon now was his dignity and the law. "Turn around!" Vance shouted, spinning Thorne and jamming his knee into the older man's leg to force his stance wide. He slapped the handcuffs on tight. The metal bit into Thorne's wrists. "You are making a mistake," Thorne said, facing the wall, his cheek pressed against a vintage railway poster. "You are making a $6 million mistake. Shut up," Vance grunted, tightening the second cuff. "You're under arrest." Brock Holloway watched from the counter, a flicker of doubt finally crossing his face. The man wasn't fighting like a drunk or a vagrant. He was speaking like a lawyer. But it was too late. The show was in motion. Vance grabbed Thorne by the tricep and marched him toward the door. "Move it." They walked past the tables of stunned commuters. "This is shameful," a woman in a business suit called out. "He wasn't doing anything. I've been here longer than him," a young man shouted, standing up. "Why aren't you arresting me?" Vance ignored them, his tunnel vision absolute. He was the hero clearing the station. He pushed Thorne out into the main concourse. The high ceilings of Union Station amplified the sound of the handcuffs clicking. Hundreds of people were rushing for trains, and the sight of a police officer frog-marching an older black man stopped traffic. The circle of phones grew. Thorne saw the cameras. He looked directly at the nearest one, a teenager filming for TikTok, and spoke clearly. "My name is Marcus Thorne. I am the leaseholder of this property. I am being arrested for trespassing in my own building by Officer." He glanced at the badge. "Officer Vance badge number 4922. I am offering no resistance." "Quit talking to the audience," Vance snapped, shoving Thorne toward the exit. They stepped out into the biting rain. Vance didn't protect Thorne's head as he guided him into the back of the patrol car. He shoved him in, slammed the door, and walked around to the driver's seat. As Vance pulled away from the curb, the adrenaline began to fade, replaced by a self-righteous simmer. He looked in the rearview mirror at Thorne. "You know," Vance said, adopting a lecturing tone, "if you'd just listened to the manager, none of this would have happened. You guys always have to make it a spectacle. You think you're above the rules." Thorne sat straight, despite the handcuffs digging into his back. He looked out the window at the city he had helped build. "Officer Vance," Thorne said calmly, "I don't think I am above the rules. I think you believe you are the rule. And that is why you are currently driving a police vehicle for the last time in your life." Vance laughed. "I'll be sure to tell the judge that." The drive to the central precinct took 15 minutes. Vance spent it fantasizing about the booking report. He would write up the aggressive demeanor, the refusal to comply, the pure disruption of business. He would be the proactive cop who cleaned up the station. He pulled into the Sally Port, parked, and hauled Thorne out. They walked into the booking area. The desk sergeant on duty was Thomas Miller, a 58-year-old veteran who had spent 30 years on the force. Miller had seen everything. He knew every judge, every council member, and every major business owner in the city. He was sipping coffee and reading a sports page when Vance walked in with his prisoner. Miller looked up, bored. "What do we have Vance loitering?" "Trespassing," Vance said proudly. "Refused to leave the Iron Rail Café. Manager called it in. Suspect was non-compliant." Miller looked at the prisoner. Then he looked closer. The coffee cup halfway to his mouth froze. Miller's eyes widened. He stood up slowly, the newspaper sliding to the floor. "Vance," Miller said, his voice trembling slightly. "Who is that?" "Suspect didn't have ID," Vance said. "Claimed he owned the place. Usual story." Miller walked around the desk, his face draining of color. He looked at Marcus Thorne. "Mr. Thorne?" Miller asked, his voice filled with horror. Thorne nodded politely. "Hello, Sergeant Miller. It's been a while. Since the Police Athletic League fundraiser last year, I believe." Vance looked between them, confused. "You know this guy, Sarge?" Miller ignored Vance. He turned on the rookie with a ferocity that made the other officers in the room freeze. "Get those cuffs off him, now." "Sarge, he was trespassing." "I said get them off." Miller roared, his face turning purple. "Do you have any idea who this is? This is Marcus Thorne. He doesn't just own the lease on the station, you idiot. He's the chairman of the Civic Redevelopment Board. He donated the tactical gear you're wearing right now." Vance felt the blood drain from his face. The room started to spin. He looked at Thorne, who was watching him with a pitying, icy stare. Vance fumbled for his keys. His hands were shaking so hard he dropped them. Miller shoved him aside, snatched the keys from the floor, and unlocked the handcuffs himself. "Mr. Thorne, I am so sorry," Miller said, helping Thorne rub his wrists. "I don't know what happened, but we will fix this immediately." Thorne didn't look at Miller. He looked at Vance. "I told you to check," Thorne said softly. "I told you to look at the tablet. I told you my name. You chose not to listen because you didn't like what you saw." Vance stammered. The manager said, you looked like—" "I looked like what?" Thorne asked, stepping closer. "Say it. What did I look like that made you ignore the law?" Vance couldn't speak. The silence in the precinct was deafening. "I want a lieutenant," Thorne said to Miller. "And I want my lawyer. And I want the body camera footage preserved immediately." "It's already done, sir," Miller said. "Lieutenant is on the way down." The fallout was nuclear. By the time Thorne walked out of the precinct without charges, obviously the video from the station was already viral. #coffee. While Black was trending again, this time with a twist, the victim was one of the most powerful men in the city. The headline, "Rookie Cop Arrests Station Owner for Trespassing," was on CNN by 2:00 p.m. The lawsuit filed by Thorne's legal team 3 days later was a masterclass in litigation. It named the city the police department, the Iron Rail Café's parent company, Brock Holloway, and Officer Derek Vance. The investigation didn't take long. The body camera footage was damning. It showed Thorne calm, polite, and offering proof. It showed Vance aggressive, dismissive, and escalating without cause. It showed the moment Vance refused to look at the lease agreement. The city attorneys took one look at the video and told the mayor to open the checkbook. There was no defense. You cannot arrest a man for trespassing on property he legally controls. It is a legal impossibility. The arrest was false imprisonment assault and a civil rights violation wrapped in a package of sheer incompetence. Officer Derek Vance was placed on administrative leave that afternoon. He was terminated 2 weeks later. The Internal Affairs report noted his catastrophic failure of judgment and inability to separate bias from objective policing. At 23, his law enforcement career was over. He was decertified, meaning he could never work as a police officer in the state again. Brock Holloway fared no better. The corporate owners of the Iron Rail flew in the next day. They fired Brock for violating discrimination policies and making a false police report. He was blacklisted from the hospitality industry in the city. The settlement was finalized in 6 months. The city paid Marcus Thorne $5 million. The coffee shop chain paid $1.4 million to avoid a boycott that was already tanking their stock. But Thorne didn't keep the money. In a final act of poetic justice, he used the $6.4 million to establish the Thorne Legal Defense Fund, a non-profit located in Union Station in the office space directly above the cafe. The fund provides free legal representation to individuals wrongfully accused of low-level crimes like loitering and trespassing. As for Officer Vance, he learned the hardest lesson of all: the badge is a heavy weight, and if you use it as a weapon against the people you serve, it will eventually crush you. He works in warehouse logistics now, a job where he has to follow orders and has no authority over anyone. Every time he sees a man in a work coat, he remembers the mistake that cost him everything. This story forces us to ask a difficult question. How many Marcus Thornes are there who don't have the money or the status to fight back? How many people are dragged out of stations and cafes every day, their lives ruined because an officer decided they didn't look like they belonged? Justice shouldn't require a millionaire's bank account. It should be the standard, not the exception. What do you think? Should officers be personally liable for settlements when they ignore clear evidence? And what about the manager? Should making a biased 911 call be a crime itself? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. These conversations are uncomfortable, but they are necessary. If you want to see more stories where the truth finally wins, hit that like button and subscribe. Until next time, stay safe and watch out for each other.